Hello, homies, and a very warm welcome to Homeopathy Hangouts. Today, we have the immense privilege of speaking with the beautiful Declan Hammond, who so many of you have contacted me and hounded me to get him on the show. So here he is. He's all yours. Welcome to the show, Declan.
Thank you.
It's so
It's kind of surreal to hear this, and so beautiful to be the other side of the globe and hear that we can have a connection and with the miracles of technology to be able to show up in each other's lives. Great. I'm delighted to be here.
absolutely. And like I said, two of the homeopaths on my team, Nicole McConnell and Sarah Scott, they're both Irish, and they both actually were taught by you in Ireland, and they were both just gushing when I said that you're coming on the show. So yeah, it's truly special to have you here. I just have
Thank you.
one problem with today's interview, because we could talk about your journey of being a healer for so many decades, your teaching journey, your tantric yoga, your shamanism, transpersonal therapy, cosmic care, which I found really interesting, and drug harm reduction, unspeakable grief, men's well-being, non-ordinary states of consciousness, homeopathy for end stage of life, remedies like ayahuasca, iboga, and alonium, self-care for healers, LM potencies. So I'm like, where do we start? Have you? Well, I tell you where I normally start is I normally ask people how they were first introduced to homeopathy. So maybe while I sit here in the conundrum of where on earth we start, maybe you can tell our listeners of how you were first introduced to homeopathy.
I guess my journey of healing, my spiritual journey, very early in my life, and I found myself training very early on as a 20-year-old to I found myself drawn to a practice of Tantra yoga, which led to me becoming or training to become a teacher of this and a monk. And quite a few of my teachers, when I went to India, would arrive in the mornings with the bag. And I was always curious about what was in those bags. And, they all had remedies in them. So they had, after their meditations, they had gone around to the villages and they had checked out the health of different people and people who were being challenged in whatever way, and they would dispense remedies, homeopathic remedies. I'd never heard the word, homeopathic. What's homeopathic? Oh, it's a natural, very gentle form of medicine. It's the most powerful form of medicine there is. Oh, interesting. That's really great. So my personal practice was I was much more interested in the meditation and everything else. But it was always in the back of my mind. And so I really thought, well, if you're going to go for medicine, it seems to be an interesting thing to do. So I started to read books and to just be curious about it. But I said, look, homeopathy is, I'm well, I'm healthy. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to likely to be ever using it, but it's great to know that it's there. I became a father in 1979, and I had twins, and my children were born at 27 weeks, which is pretty early. And my son was 1,200 grams, and my daughter was 850, just under 900 grams. And she was told she wouldn't survive and was in the incubator for ages. So I really got to see how wonderful conventional medicine can be, because my children wouldn't have been alive without the incubators and all the wonderful things that were available in the late 70s to support them. When they came out of hospital, my daughter threw a huge fever. And as a new parent, I was freaked out. I knew about homeopathy, but my daughter was flailing around. And thankfully, I had, by one of these beautiful synchronicities, I had found a card in a health food shop, a Dr. Rice homeopath. Homeopathy, I know about homeopathy. So in my desperation, with my daughter screaming upstairs, I called Dr. Rice. And this beautiful elderly man came probably with a half an hour after my call, arrived in my house, really old school homeopath, looked at her, said, okay. He tipped out a bottle, tipped out a little sachet of powder, dropped a drop onto that, onto a little powder, and tipped it into her mouth. My daughter was flailing around, big eyes, looked terrified, and I was terrified as a parent and utterly helpless as a parent. As soon as the powder touched her lips into her mouth, she just went, oh. My first thought was, oh my God, he's killed her. I thought, jeez. And I just noticed she was breathing calmly. Seconds before, she was in massive distress, flailing around. And she was on the edge of having a fit. She was asleep. She'd calmed down. And I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And I said, listen, this is amazing. I've heard about homeopathy. I saw it in India, but this is the first time I've actually seen it so close to my life, And he said, yeah, it's a wonderful form of medicine. Yeah. So I said, listen, how do I train in this? You have to become a doctor. You have to become a doctor and do a postgraduate training. This, at that time in the 70s, it was the only way to become a homeopath. And I thought, okay, I'm not prepared to start off. I had already trained as a yoga teacher. I trained as a psychologist. The idea of going back to school to study medicine, to study a form of medicine that didn't really resonate with me. So I could, many years later, become a homeopath. That just didn't sit with me. And he said, no, you have to become a doctor first. You can't do homeopathy without becoming a doctor. And if you really want to get me to do something, tell me not to do it. It's some perverse part of being Irish, There's a rebel in there somewhere that just says, okay, if I'm told I can't do it, I'll bloody do this. So I read everything I could. I moved back. Had been living in Denmark at the time, and I moved back to Denmark, and I found myself a few Indian homeopaths working in Denmark, and I apprenticed myself to them. I spent time talking with them. I watched them in their practice. They gave me books to read. So I, spent a couple of years just training myself, reading beautiful books, reading Hammond and his writings. It was like, I know this stuff. When he talked about that, this is spirit medicine, this is medicine, that health and disease are matters of spirit. They're matters of being in balance and in harmony with your spirit. And when you're in harmony with your spirit, then you can be a channel for the higher purpose of your life, And I was like, this is my language, and I was like, this was written like nearly 200 years ago, and it speaks directly to my heart. And I thought, this is my life. This is my life. And it was 1986 before I could finally get to college, because there weren't any colleges that were doing it. And then a college opened up in London that I got to hear about. And so I commuted every week, every school weekend. I hopped on a plane in Denmark. I flew to London, and so I picked it up, and I felt all my Christmases had come to once when I arrived in college in the School of Homeopathy in London. And it was just like, there were 150 people in my class.
Wow.
And like every one of them were amazing people. We're all doing homeopathy. We're changing people's lives, and it changed my life. The first remedy I took was like, wow, it turned me inside out, turned me upside down. It was the trigger for the breaking up of my marriage. My life got turned inside out for an amazingly good way. I was a lifetime sufferer of hay fever. My homeopath at the time, an amazing man who's since passed, Robert Davison, he looked at me and said, and he gave me a dose of a remedy. And I was in the middle of a hay fever attack at the time. And I was like, oh, I can breathe again. That was in 1987. One pill. And I never have had hay fever since. And it was amazing. It was an extraordinary prescription. It was a prescription of a remedy called Sol, potentized sunlight.
No.
Which is a fascinating prescription, and still a fascinating prescription for me. The role of the sun in triggering the allergies. And he was so intuitive and he was so aware of the different remedies. One pill, and all those years ago, and you know, we're going through the hay fever season here in Ireland at the moment, and I'm watching people sniffling and sneezing and their eyes running and burning. And my heart is saying, God, go to a homeopath for God's sake, you know. And it's just wonderful, you know. And my grandson, for the first time this year, as a 12-year-old, started to get hay fever. I didn't know about it. I hadn't seen him for about 10 days. When I saw him and his eyes were burning, I said, do you have hay fever? So why didn't you tell me? I gave him a remedy. I saw him after 2 weeks. How's your hay fever? I don't have hay fever. uh, 2 weeks ago, your eyes were burning and your nose was running and you were sneezing. Oh, but I don't have it anymore. Like these are small little things, and we can both come up with probably thousands of stories like that.
Yeah.
And that's the magic of homeopathy. One dose of one pill, and things shift and change. And homeopathy has changed my life, continues to change my life, and I just find it so wonderful and an extraordinary blessing. Like, I came across homeopathy in 1976, and I've got to know more about it. I've got to understand it better. And I'm more fascinated and more inspired by it now, and the work that I see homeopathy doing in my life and my personal life and in the lives of my patients. It's just the most extraordinary thing to be doing. And it's been really a blessing that I've spent most of my adult life working in this field here, and it's made such absolute difference in my life. It saved me when I went through some of the most challenging times of my life, and I've suffered quite a number of really challenging bereavements, and homeopathy has brought me back, again and again and again from these really challenging places. And to see patients, like yesterday I had a patient to come, and we were looking back when she came to me 6 months ago, broken. I said, do you remember that person? She said, I honestly don't. Everything in my life has changed. My relationship to myself, to my body, to my sexuality, to my partner, everything is different now. Yeah. I said, oh, by the way, how is your breast tumor? Oh, that's gone. But she was more, and I remember saying to her the first time we met, I said, if I only help you dissolve your breast tumor, I'll be disappointed. If I don't hear about the changes you've made in your life. She said, no. In her first appointment, she said, I want to get back to normal. I want to get back to how my life was before I had the diagnosis of cancer. And my response was, if you get back to where you were before the cancer, that's the state that brought you to the place that you now have cancer. So I don't want you back to normal. I really want to hear and see you in a different place. And she laughed and she said, you can't believe how much of a different place I'm in now, And Eugenie, this is what we both get paid for.
Yep. It's the best
we
job
both
in the world.
we both had tears in our eyes, really acknowledging the incredible journey she's made in the last 6 months. Not only did she help herself shift from cancer, but she healed the relationship with her mum that she found was the seed of her cancer. She has an adult daughter who she had very difficult relationship with, and that has changed. The lump in her breast cancer brought her into a place of understanding that there was something stuck in the mothering, in the line of the mothers in her family. Her mum had a difficult relationship with her gran. She had a difficult relationship with her mother. When she came first, she had a really difficult relationship with her daughter. That's healed. The indigenous suggests that when we do healing, we do it for all our relations. And they don't talk about just the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged relationships, the plant relationships, all of these things. Yeah. This plant thrives when my life is really flowing well. All our relations benefit. We're working with energy medicine. when we bring things into balance, the healing just flows through the generations, flows out of us. There's no such thing as individual healing. When we support an individual, every individual we support, how many people did they meet? How many people are they in contact with? We're shifting the energy. We help heal the ancestral line. We help people to find their soul purpose. And this is what we get paid for. Heck, how blessed are we?
It's the best. It really, really is. And like you say, I love reading back to a client, you know, just from sometimes even 2 months earlier, or 6 months, or a year, or a few years, if you've been lucky enough to walk that journey with that client for multiple years, reading that back to them. And when you see there's no resonance, when you read that back to the person, there's no anger or sadness or jealousy or anything, you read that back because that energetic resonance that was there has been cleared. So now when you read it back to them, it's just like, oh yeah, there's like nothing there when I think of that incident or that person or that, you know, whatever event. It's like, oh yeah, that's
it's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. My
I have to
grandson said, "What hay fever? I don't have hay fever."
I have to,
I
this is a
did.
question I've always had. I've always wondered, do you think that somehow we're cheating by using homeopathy? Because sometimes I feel if you've gone through something traumatic, you should actually like sit there and like really do the work and like go to lots of counseling and really, you know, get it all out of your system. But sometimes you just give a remedy and that thing just heals by itself magically somehow. And I've often wondered, are we cheating by doing that? Because you're not going through the hard slog of healing that thing from your past. You can literally sometimes take a remedy, and it's just like that energetic resonance is not there anymore. It's like you're in a completely different place. So I have often thought that to myself: is are we cheating?
It's an interesting question. I have loads of my patients over the years have done lots of therapy and have worked really hard at understanding what's happened to them and why it happened to them. And they're like this because their mother or father didn't do that. And they have all the stories. They're still sick. So they've done the work, they've done the analysis, and it's all a mentalized journey for them. They have done the journey. Oh, healing? What's healed here? You know about the stories, but you haven't actually healed. Healing for me is when you've moved on from those places. An awful lot of people have done lots of work. I've spent years in therapy. I had one patient who came to me and he had been in psychoanalysis 3 times a week for 20 years. And he was one of the most messed up patients I ever treated. And we had 2 months therapy, and he had shifted out of the grief he was carrying through all of that time. His psychoanalysis rang me up, furious with me that he shouldn't have done things so quickly. And I was bemused by that, because one of the beautiful lines that Hammond writes, he said, the goal of healing is rapid, gentle, and permanent. That's the work. That's the potential of homeopathy. We have a tool that speeds this up. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. It doesn't feel like cheating for me. If we help people to move out of trauma, challenges, suffering, and we help them quickly, you know, I'm really impatient in my personal life. I want to see results, and I want to see them fast, you know. And for me, the real healing happens not just when the symptoms go away, but when people become conscious about what's happening, conscious of why they were sick in the first place, and conscious of what they need to do to maintain their health. You can have a very big experience. You can have a big remedy. You can do all sorts of things. And now in Australia, you can go along for some psychedelic treatment. You can use MDMA now. Australia, massive respect to your country.
Finally,
now,
as of 20 days
the
ago.
first country in the world, as the first country in the world, you have legalized psilocybin for depression and MDMA for PTSD. You know, how wonderful. I have many patients who come to me after doing retreats, after doing underground retreats, or having been to an underground psychiatrist or therapist who have used these experiences. When people go, "Oh, it's the most amazing thing! My depression has lifted." There's lots of research being done in London and many other places of people who had absolutely depression that hasn't responded to anything, and they've given them a single dose of psilocybin, and depression is gone. Mm. But they found that after a few months, the depression comes back again. So if you have given a remedy that the person has shifted out of it, or they've taken a psychedelic now legal in Australia, and that has taken it out, that's not the healing. Mm. You can change your life only by changing your life. So to take the remedy and to make it go away, that's the magical thinking. If that's all you've achieved, I have to say I would be disappointed. Like I said with my patient with the breast cancer, if all that happens here is that your tumor disappears, I'd be disappointed. It's, have you changed? Have you brought your life to another level here? Have you realigned yourself with your purpose? If you have done that, the work is not over when the symptoms have disappeared. And when I'm working with patients with cancer, that's when the real work starts. Because the real work is changing your life. The real work is shifting your consciousness, taking your life to another level. So, yeah, if we're only focusing on the symptoms, it's not, I don't see it as cheating, but I don't think that we've really done all the work. You haven't really made the changes until you've changed your life. And taking a remedy or taking a psychedelic, that doesn't change your life. You change your life by changing it, by making the changes.
Well, these are the types of things that are constantly going round and round in my head, these types of questions. And in my musings, the answer I came to is that all of this is just an illusion anyway. All of us are perfect just as we are. And I think in this human form, sometimes we just forget that. And so I've decided that it's not cheating because the remedy just reminds us that everything is perfect anyway. All this suffering is just an illusion. We're all, yeah. So.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Like I really see that too. Remedies are reminders. I work a lot with what's known as homeopathy as LM potency. So most of my patients don't go away with the pills; they go away with a little bottle like this that they will take on a daily basis. And I invite people while they're taking the remedy, not just to squirt it in their mouth and run out the door, but to take a few minutes to tune in with their body, to tune in with themselves. How am I at the moment? How is it in my breast? How is it in whatever part of me is suffering? And just to take those moments as a way of just dropping back into themselves, taking the remedy consciously. I really make a point of letting people know what remedy they're taking and why they're taking it. And they usually have a little sound bite. So you're taking this remedy. It's called pulsatilla. Pulsatilla is a plant that they call it the wind flower. It moves and gets very affected by what's happening around them, but it has deep roots. So when you take this remedy, you've been a very sensitive person who's been very impacted by what's going on in your life. This remedy brings you in touch with your deep roots. So whatever's going on, whatever changes are there, the remedy, every time you take a remedy, it's bringing you deeper into your roots. So take the remedy with that. So you have an intention. One of the things that I learned from working with different plant medicines in indigenous cultures is taking with intention. You don't take something unconsciously. There is a ceremony, there's a ritual in the way you take it. You take it consciously, and you take it for a particular reason with a particular intention. The intention colors the outcome. So the more that you take your remedy with the clear intention, the quicker it works. I told you I'm impatient. I want to see patients move through what's happening, what's going on for them. I feel people suffering, and I want to see them move out of their suffering as quickly as possible. The more that they can bring their awareness to their own journey, yeah, the quicker this happens. You know, conventional medicine is all about fighting against, taking it away, removing. Yeah. A patient with the breast cancer was facing an operation to have it taken away.
Mm.
And the doctor said, once you have it taken out, cancer is gone. And she asked me about that. I said, cancer is in your energy phase. You can cut that out. But if you haven't made the changes and shifted the energy that created that in the first place, you're going to be coming back to me with something deeper, and probably with metastasis, or probably cancer in a deeper place. So the invitation is really to be conscious about what you're doing, why you're doing it. And the beautiful thing about taking LM potencies on a daily basis is that on a daily basis, you can tune in. You can tune into the remedy. You can tune into, what am I doing here? What am I doing? Talking to this old guy, and taking this remedy. What am I taking it for? I'm taking it to tune into my roots. I'm taking it to really reconnect with myself. And that brings the mind into the body and really allows a deeper consciousness of the journey. And the greater awareness that patients have about what's going on for them, the quicker I tell every patient that my job is to get rid of them. And often, if they've been in therapy and they've gone there every week for the last many years, they kind of look at me askance and say, well, yeah, I want to see you out of this, through this, and into a new phase of your life as quickly as possible. And that is, for me, that's really important, is to help people move through it. And my experience, and I didn't always do this, this wasn't part of my training. And my training back, in the 70s and 80s, well, it was give one pill. It was minimum dose. So one pill. And most of the teachings that I had in homeopathy came from Kent and from Hahnemann's earlier writings. But Kent only had 5 editions of the organ in Hahnemann's main book. And there were some wonderful things in the last edition. Students often ask me what kind of a homeopath I am, and said, oh, are you classical? And I have no idea what that means, because in the 80s in homeopathy, this new term came in, and it mainly came from the work of a homeopath, Greek homeopath called George Vitulcus, who was very inspired by Kent. And he found that most of what was known as homeopathy, particularly in Europe, were bottles which had 20, 30, 40 different remedies in it. And they were designed to treat a condition. So it was a very medical way of working with remedies. And he rightly said, well, this is not really homeopathy. Homeopathy is a similar remedy. It's similar to the person's state. And he brought us back to the idea that Hahnemann really was talking about. It's individual. You're treating every individual. And every individual, it's like 10 people with depression are likely to have probably 10 different remedies. And he really focused on that. And that became known as classical homeopathy, one remedy and one dose of one remedy. But I found over the years that didn't always work. Giving one dose of a remedy and having to wait for extended periods of time. If I were to do that with some of my cancer patients, they'd be dead while I was waiting for the results. So I started to look at, what was Hahnemann actually doing in his later years? And he was giving more than one remedy at a time. And he was working with LM potencies. He was giving these on a daily basis. And I thought, wow. And that's what Hahnemann was doing in 1843. And one of my musings, I muse about things too. And one of my musings
I'm sure you do.
What edition of Hahnemann's organ would we be on now? Hahnemann spent 53 years in his life, and he would eat with each edition of the work. He said, this is the most perfect way of doing it. And he was very clear about it. And then the next edition of the writings would say, well, actually, I found by doing the work, I found that this is the more perfect way. And I love that. So for me, that inspires me to say, yes, I would consider myself a Hahnemannian homeopath. And that the spirit of Hahnemann is the spirit of constantly looking for better ways of doing it, constantly finding what does this individual need? Yes, I only work according to a particular system. And in homeopathy, we've got some amazing teachers now. I have a friend in Holland, Jan Schwolten, who does amazing work with analysis. Rajan Shankar is doing this. There's so many people doing amazing work at the moment. But I have lots of colleagues say, I only work with this system or that system. But Hahnemann wasn't working with a system. He was constantly reinventing it. He wasn't getting stuck. And it's just fascinating for me. When I met Jan Scholten first in the 90s, he said to me, do what you do, and as long as it's working, great. And if what you're doing is not working, here's another tool for your toolbox. And I thought that was wonderful. And that really inspired me at the time. We've got so many different tools, but a lot of homeopaths get stuck in one way of doing things. And it's like you have a box of tools and you only use a hammer. And there's an old cliche with that. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything ends up looking like a nail.
Exactly.
So it's like, no, we need to learn how to use all tools to be able to really individualize the treatment. And that's what Hahnemann did. But, that was Hahnemann in 1843. It's fascinating for me to consider, if we follow the spirit of what he's doing all these years later, before we have, Freud and Jung, before we have quantum physics, before we have all sorts of different tools that have really helped us understand homeopathy. All of these, developments in psychology and psychiatry and science have really helped me understand what happens in these pills that have nothing in them that can have such a dramatic effect on people. We're still struggling to explain homeopathy. I always think that, homeopathy is a 21st, 22nd century science, but we have the language of the 19th century to explain it. So, we need to keep exploring about why it works. But, with all the respect to so many people who are out there, colleagues who are doing research, I'm much more interested in how I can use it. I honestly don't care about why it works. I can flick a light switch now and bring on a light. I don't need to understand how electricity works, and this is how it is with homeopathy for me. I know it works, and I know there are ways of working with it that work, and I'm constantly looking, well, how can I use this in a more effective way? And that's what the journey is. And that, from my understanding of Hahnemann, that's what he was all about, to find the most perfect way of doing it. And I've been at it a long time now. And, some of the stuff that I'm doing with my patients now, especially patients who are going through huge, mental and spiritual challenges. There's a wonderful term from transpersonal relations, transpersonal psychology. It talks about spiritual emergencies. Many of my patients are actually going through these challenges in their lives. If they've been to a psychiatrist, they will have come with a diagnosis of psychosis or schizophrenia. We've no understanding of what happens when people crack open on those levels. The indigenous folks around the world know about these things. When people, their psyche cracks open and they start hearing voices or seeing visions, the elders look at them and say, wow, this is a wonderful gift for our people here. If we can support the person in that sensitivity, in the cracking opening that they're going through at the moment, if we can support them, they become the healers, the shamans, the people who will be of great benefit to the community. We lock these people up in their Western society. We stick psychiatric labels on them. Hahnemann, in some of his earliest work, was in what they called in the old days lunatic asylums in Transylvania. He went to work there with people who were being locked up and who were being chained. And he came up with some extraordinary things. It's extraordinary in his earlier writings. Very, very humane, compassionate, loving ways of treating people who had these challenges, and we've had 60 years now of transpersonal psychology from the work of people like Stanislav Grof and some wonderful psychiatrists who've been developing an understanding. Just because people are having these, non-ordinary experiences, that this is not necessary pathology here. People are having spiritual openings, spiritual awakenings that we don't have context for in our culture. When people start to have these non-ordinary experiences, people will very often say, well, this is psychosis. And even in homeopathy, we say, oh, these patients are having delusions and we have to treat their delusions. Are they delusions when somebody is having these experiences? In many cases, not. And this is a big part of the work that I'm doing at the moment. And it's totally inspired by Hahnemann and his compassion. But it really challenges me to find new tools and new remedies, because people are coming in and telling me things. Oh my God, right? You're hearing what? You're seeing what? Okay, how can I best support you in that? And it's just a beautiful thing for me to be able to support people in those kind of situations and help them relieve their distress in it and help them to move into a new level of sensitivity. We're evolving here. Many kids are coming in with all sorts of experiences. My grandkids came in, and I one of the biggest gifts and challenges of my life was I had a son killed 17 years ago, 26-year-old. When my eldest grandson is 12 years old now, I had the screensaver of my phone was a picture of my son. The first word he said was my son's name.
Wow.
He didn't say mama. He didn't say dada. He said Gopi, which was our pet name for my son. As he started to speak, I said, do you know him? Oh, yeah. Where did you know him? Oh, we were together in the Shining Place.
All over goosebumps.
And, my daughter was there looking like, and hey, you say, yeah, it was like the most natural thing in the world. I was like, what? Yeah, we were together in the Shining Place. Yeah.
What age
No
was
big
he
deal. And he
what
went
age
back
was
to
he then?
playing what he was playing with it. Sorry?
What age was your grandson?
Sorry.
What?
At that stage, maybe 2 years old.
Okay. I've heard until about 4 or 5 years old that the veil is quite thin for them, and they do remember a lot of that. Does he still remember that now?
Yeah. He still remembers it, yeah. But it's no big deal. And as he started to speak a bit more, I was trying to unpack this, and I had lots of conversations from my daughter. Have you said and have you shared it? No. I shared, I had a brother, and that was it, And so I said, well, do you know what happened to him? Oh, he died. And do you know how he died? Yeah, he was killed. There was a big bang and lots of rocks came on top of him. There was lots of smoke and he died. Oh my God. And I'm kind of like in shock at this stage. I said, how do you know? I was there. I saw it. Yeah. These are kids coming in now. And I'm seeing a lot of these kids. They're coming in with these experiences. I'm seeing adults awakening to experiences like that. Sometimes as a result of trauma, sometimes as a result of meditation retreats, sometimes going to the jungle and drinking different medicines like ayahuasca and opening up to things. And people are opening up to these. People are awakening, are evolving to more life, more aliveness and experiences. Often when this starts, especially with adults, and sometimes with kids, when they present to their medics, they are treated as if they're psychiatrically ill. Yeah? I had a 12-year-old who came to me some years ago who was brought by the parents in great distress because he'd had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And they were given very strong antipsychotic drugs to take. And they were reluctant to give them because they saw the side effects. And among the side effects, death was listed twice among the side effects of this particular drug. So, they were very reluctant, as you can imagine, to give their kid this. And so they said, what's the story? And I said, would you mind if I talk to your son on his own? And I asked him permission as well. And he said, no, Grant. He says, so what's the story here? What's happening? He said, well, my granny died 6 months ago. And when I go tonight and I'm really sad, I really love my granny.
Mm.
And he teared up, and I really love my granny. And at night she comes to me. And at night she sits by my bed and strokes my head and says, I love you, and it's all right. She talks to me and it's and and is that all? No, sometimes I see a light at the end of my bed. I think it's an angel. And I said, what happens when this goes on? And he said, I'm crying and I feel really sad. And when the angel comes, I feel really happy again. At this stage, I had tears in my eyes as well. I said, yeah, really, how wonderful. So I asked the parents to come back in, and I said, listen, what's the story here? And they said, we told the doctor that he's seeing and hearing dead people, and the doctor said, oh my God. And he reached for his pad and prescribed it. Said, this is schizophrenia. And I asked the boy to tell what he told me again. And when he'd finished, there were four of us in the room wiping tears from our eyes, And I said, what do you feel? Do you feel this boy needs antipsychotic drugs? I said, oh, we're so happy that he's been looked after and his gran is there and his guardian angel is there.
Mm.
Now, as a homeopath, we can look to our books, we can look to our repertory, and in our index of symptoms, we can find symptoms like delusions. He sees dead people. Mm. Delusions. He hears dead people. Mm. Delusions. He hears voices. Now, we could do the same thing as a psychiatrist there, but is this a problem for this person? Is the hearing voices, seeing visions, these non-ordinary experiences, are they a problem for the patient? Mm. If they are, then we have something to do. We have work to do. In this case, and in many, many cases, they're gifts. They're gifts from the beyond. And in any indigenous culture, these people would be singled out as special and supported to become the healers that they were born to be. Many of these potential healers in our culture have been drugged up and have been really seriously damaged. Instead of opening up into their higher purpose, they're presenting to a medical system that has no understanding of this. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge for homeopaths as well, because people are coming to this. I talk about this kind of work very often in my seminars, and I'll often hear from patients, but they're just delusions, Declan. Delusions to whom? To you as a homeopath? To the patient? If this patient, like this young boy, is having an experience of being supported, is this a delusion? Yeah, I don't care what it is. This is an experience that's really special here. And we need to evolve our understanding about what's normal and to embrace the experiences like that my grandson had. How do I explain it? I don't know. Is there a realm of worlds beyond this? I don't know. But my grandkids have come in with this world. Yeah. My second grandson, when he was 5, he had an abscess on his brain. He had to have brain surgery. And it was amazing, amazing, amazing skill with the surgeons. But I had healer friends doing work, and I did some really beautiful work with them afterwards. And the surgeon couldn't believe the results. He said he's never had somebody who has responded so quickly and healed so quickly after. He was told he would be in bed for at least 2 weeks after. He couldn't get up. The day after the surgery, the grandson had tubes in everywhere. And he said, I want to go play. He pulled the tubes out, he peeled it off, and he went off to play with the other kids. The nurses were aghast and everything. But I asked him then afterwards, I said, well, so what happened? What did you know what happened? Oh, yeah, Eiliver came and he was holding me during the operation.
That was his son?
That was my son. Yeah, he came up to the operation. How do we explain these things? In our homeopathic literature, in the medical literature, how do we explain this? Yeah, we don't need to explain it. People are having these experiences, and all of us have these kind of experiences and often dismiss them. You know, for me, this is something very special to be able to feel this is normal in my life. It's become normal. People are often very shy about saying, I had this, these voices are telling me this. And what are they telling me? They're telling me, leave the past behind, step into your power. They're really encouraging me. But I'm really worried that I'm hearing voices. You're hearing voices that are encouraging you. I'm really excited, and they look at me like, you don't think I'm mad? I said, this doesn't sound mad to me if you're hearing things that are really enhancing your life. Yeah. So this is the work that I do, and it's so inspiring. And it really expands my understanding of what people's potential are. Many of my patients are coming with experience I've never had. And, I have to get over myself in this. I have to get over my prejudice, my sense of what's right. And Hahnemann, in his earliest writings, he constantly spoke about the importance of getting over our prejudice and being, unprejudiced in the work we do. We're often prejudiced. We often look at these things and these states as, oh, that's not normal. That's the delusion. That's the delusion of the homeopath. That's the prejudice of the homeopath speaking, or the doctor speaking, when they put people into those boxes. And really have to wake up to the possibility that there's so much more going on, and people are moving into a new phase in their lives. Our children are coming in with experiences that go way beyond the experiences that we may have had. And that's the evolving. That's, for me, this is the excitement of the work that we do, that we're helping to support this evolution. We need to move to a higher level of consciousness. My God, just turn on the news. Look at what's happening, in Europe at the moment. There's so much in my tiny town here. We've got thousands of refugees from the Ukraine who are fleeing war. Horrendous stuff that's happening. People are coming with horrendous trauma and carrying tremendous trauma. Here in Ireland, we had 900 years of colonization with incredibly damaging things done to us, and people are still carrying that. We need to release the trauma of the past. We need to move into a higher consciousness. And this is the work we do. This is why I call the work that I do soul medicine. And when I came across homeopathy and I realized its potential, and especially reading Hahnemann, this is medicine for souls. This is medicines to support people on their soul journey. People often get drawn into homeopathy, make this go away, make my symptoms go away, have my skin become better, my periods become more regular, my hay fever to go away. Yeah, okay, we can do that. But if that's all we do as homeopaths, we're really working at a very superficial level. We can do that, and we can do that very well. And it's wonderful to be able to help people who are suffering from, things like period problems or hay fevers. But let's wake up to the potential of this. Read Hahnemann. Read that this is helping people align with their soul purpose. That we can become channels for the higher purpose of our existence. Like these kind of words, like they were written in 1843, and the idea that we have to help people to come into balance on an emotional and mental and physical level, that all of us is functioning in a balanced way. Like, wow, what a beautiful thing to do. Wouldn't we all love to be in that kind of balance? But Hahnemann is suggesting that's only the prerequisite, getting in that kind of balance, body, mind, spirit, with all our bits working how they should be. Yeah, that's the prerequisite for us being an instrument of the higher purpose of our existence. Like, wow. Every time I read that piece of writing, and I'm paraphrasing it, he puts it much better than I've just done. But, it's like, wow, this is what our work is. to help people align with their soul purpose. And illness is just say, oh, this is what you need to look at. You know, my patient with the breast tumor that I was mentioning, I was like, go to your breast. You know, your body is telling you something. It's giving you information. Oh, it's cancer. I have to get rid of it. Hang on a second. You know, homeopathy is being with suffering. It's being with the disease. This doesn't make sense mentally. Make it go away. Cut it out. This is conventional medicine, a conventional approach to do it. Take it away. Homeopathy is saying, let's be with it. Let's listen to it. What is that lump in your breast telling you? You know, and in this case, it told this patient that she was carrying wounds from a relationship with her mom. She was carrying wounds in her breast that in her nursing her daughter, and in that relationship, she transmitted that. And her body, in all its wisdom, had created a lump that was saying, pay attention, listen to me. Come in here and listen to what was going on. And as she really listened and really cradled her breast and really felt into her body, she started to have images of herself as a child. And she said, I was my mom's mother, you know? And her breast told her that. Staying connected with her body, listening to it, really inviting herself to really listen, feel, intuit what was going on in her life. She started having images of her realizing at 5 years old, Eugene, at 5 years old, that her mom couldn't mother her. Her mom was married to a very abusive husband, and she realized as a 5-year-old that her mom needed to be protected. She started protecting her mom. That was the essence of her breast cancer. She spent her whole life. Her daughter is now 30 years old. All those years later, she carried that, and that trauma was passed down through the generations. Yeah.
Can I quickly ask, Declan, do you have a particular way of how you get your client to connect with that part or help them realize what their body is telling them? Do you have there's Ina Segal's book, The Secret Language of the Body, or do you what do you use to help that client connect with what the message is that they are receiving from the body? And I have a question for you about imaginary friends as well, but you can answer this one first, then I want to ask you the next one. Well, I have about 50 questions, but we'll take them one at a time.
So in this particular case, let's use her as an example. She went in, I said, you know, she really had the sense that there's a horrible lump. I feel the pressure. I feel the heat on my breast. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, but you really allow yourself to just take a moment and just ground yourself. She was sitting, we were doing this work online, and I could see that she was sitting in a tense way. I said, are your feet on the ground? No, they weren't. So I said, just invited her for a moment. Can you just put both feet on the ground a second and just relax your lower body? So just take a moment to relax your feet, your calves, your thighs, your bum, and your pelvic floor. Just take it. And as she did, I could see there was a sinking. And I said, okay, good. When she dropped into that, I said, okay, so this is, in my mind, what we're doing there. I work with the model from the Tantra traditions of the chakras. So it's we're working with energy medicine and homeopathy, but we don't have an understanding of how energy works. Tantra does. The yogic traditions do. They talk about chakras and they talk about how the energy flows through it. Every remedy has an affinity for different parts of the body and ultimately for the different chakras. So we're working on that kind of level. So but what's really important for me, before we do any kind of energy work, we need to ground. We need to stay really present. And that's base chakra stuff. So that's a sense of feeling solid, feeling rooted, feeling grounded. And that can sound very woo-woo, but it's simply relaxing the legs and the lower body and then letting the belly relax and soften. So after doing that, and you could see her visibly relaxing, her shoulders dropped. I said, okay, just take a moment now and just to go inside. Can you locate that lump in your mind's eye? Can you just drop into your breast? And she said, I don't want to go there. I said, okay, can you just take a breath and just listen to your body. Does it feel safe to do this? He said, I don't want to go. And I said, could you just take a breath for a moment? And she breathed and she relaxed and she softened and she said, okay, it's okay. We're doing this all virtually. So she went in and instinctively she put her hand on her breast and she said, oh gosh. She said, I can see the lump. So I invited her. So it said, does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a particular form? Can you really get a sensory lock on this? So I'm talking to you and I'm conscious. I'm speaking to a woman with long dark hair and glasses. So I'm speaking to that. So if you're going to communicate with your body, having a sensory lock on that experience is going to be really important. So we're not talking about, oh, my cancer. We're talking about very, very specific in this case. And she located it and she said, it's like a hard metal ball. I said, okay, what color is it? And every so often she'd open her eyes and look at me and say, what? I said, just humor me, just drop in. And then she said, oh my God, it's gray. It's dark gray. It's almost black. Yeah. It's shiny. It's metallic. I said, does it have a taste? I said, let your senses have it. Oh, it tastes metallic. It has a bitter taste. And so she started to bring all her senses in. There's lots of this inner work that I do. I draw on my Tantra training. And in Tantra, Tantra is a very misunderstood practice. And it's a practice of dealing with intensity. It's a way of being with intensity. And it can be intensely pleasurable experience or intensely painful experiences. It's how to be with them. And they very often refer to 3 keys to be with intensity: your breath, your movement, and sound. So I invite the patient to lean into the experience instead of, oh, I don't want to go there. This is a homeopathic way of working for me, that we're actually leaning into the experience. I said, just allow yourself to move into that metallic ball that tastes like this and just breathe into it. And as she said, oh my God. I said, what's happening? I said, the color is changing. The more I breathe into it, the metallic thing, it's softening and it's softening and it's no longer almost black. It's becoming lighter. So I invited her, could you just check your posture at the moment? Just if you want to really connect with this, do you need to make any small movements? And she just adjusted. Oh yeah. And it changed again. So breathing, making small movements, and she was able to really come into it and allow herself. So could you share that experience with me, what it's like? And she dropped deeper and deeper into it. And she was speaking her experience. So she was using the 3 keys: the breath, the movement, and the sound she was speaking. And as she was doing it, her mother's face appeared. And she said, I can see my mum. And she said, oh, she started to shock. Okay, please continue to breathe. Just readjust your posture. Can you still feel your feet on the ground? Oh, my legs are tight. My bum is tight. Okay, just relax. Really important. The buttocks and the pelvic floor. Often when we get into challenging places, we go up. Mm. To be with challenging places, to be with anxiety, to be with extreme states, we need to relax the lower body. Gravity grounds us. We don't have to ground ourselves. It drops. So I had to remind her a few times to do this. She was distressed to see her mum. Her mum was long dead at this point. And she was distressed to see her, and she started to cry. And she said, oh, my mum. I said, could I invite you to just continue the breathing? And she just dropped in and said, so she's really got her to see her mum clearer in that. And I said, how old are you here now? She said, because she saw her mum, and her mum was relatively young in the image that she saw. So I said, I was curious. I said, and how old are you there? She said, and the first thing she said, well, how the F will I know? And I said, well, just humor me. Just feel into it. Feel into it. Just breathe, feel into it. And she said, I'm 5. I'm 5. And then she said, I'm 5. And then she went into a whole piece. And then she started to share with me at 5. And she said, I remember that moment. I remember that moment. Her body started to shake. And I said, please just allow yourself to drop back, feel your legs, relax into it, and continue to breathe, continue to move and adjust, and keep speaking as you're doing it. She dropped. She said, I remember that moment, making that decision that my mum couldn't cope. Said, this is it. This is it. And light started to flow in her breast. She said, I can't even see the lump anymore. It's dissolved. All I can see here is light. And my experience of her, and all I'm seeing is this. And her face started to light. She opened her eyes and she looked at me, and her eyes were shining. It was like light pouring out of her eyes. I said, wow. And she said, this is my cancer. This was our first meeting. That was 6 months ago. There's no lump. Yeah.
And would you even need a remedy at that stage? Like, would you then, I mean, it's that in itself almost would be enough, but, and do you feel homeopathy still has a place then?
Okay. Well, okay. I have a roundabout answer to that question. What I just did was homeopathic. I invited her to meet her disease, to be with it. That's the word, similar suffering. It's being with the disease. What she did was essentially a homeopathic practice. So homeopathy is much bigger than the pills and potions we give us. You know, I love dancing. When I meet somebody on a dance floor who's really in tune, we align with each other and magic happens in those spaces. That's homeopathy. We're in resonance with each other. You're meeting your loved one and you're really in that space. The magic, that resonance, that's homeopathy. It's the resonance between two like energies. And we happen to use it in a medical way with homeopathy, but it's part of how the universe works. It's the magic of what happens when two like energies meet. You know, and that's the beauty of this work. So to get back to your question, I asked her, do you feel you need a remedy? And this is a question I ask every patient. Do you feel you need a remedy here? She said, yes, I do. I feel I might forget this. I'm worried that when I leave this, when I hit leave meeting, that I won't be able to do this. I need to be reminded. I need a remedy. And that was a lovely way of describing it, because I didn't explain to her that for me, remedies are an energetic reminder. It's a remembering process, reconnecting process that happens when we take the remedy. And every time we take that remedy, it's a reminder to come back to those places. So we had, so I came up with remedies for her and we worked with it. And with the risk of getting into woo-woo territory here,
go for it.
she was at a great distance. So I said, I'm thinking to give you a remedy at the moment. And I'd like to check. And I'd like to check with your breast. How does this remedy feel for you at the moment? So I said, can I just check that you're still conscious of your feet on the ground and your bum on the chair, and you're relaxed and your breathing is relaxed? And she said, yeah, I feel my heart is open now in a way that I haven't felt for years. I said, okay, from that place. And we're dealing with your heart chakra here. It's your breast. So yeah, really pay attention and breathe and just let your heart, your breast receive what I'm calling in. So I just energetically called in this particular remedy that I wanted to work with. And she started to laugh and said, what the was that? Why? Then I said, is that a yes or a no? I said, what was it? Why did I have this effect? I said, listen, your body is very simple. It works on the principle that it feels right or it doesn't feel right. We can talk about things, we can analyze things, but does this feel right for you? She said, absolutely. Right. And she's still on that remedy 6 months later. And she's had other things as well. But that's been the really important remedy for her. And it's released so much from her, And I like to confirm that. Back before COVID, I had a busy practice and a lovely, beautiful physical practice that people came to. If I came up with the remedy, I would never prescribe it without the patient feeling this was right for them. I can come up with very clever analysis and very clever intellectual approaches to it, and very satisfying for me as a prescriber, thinking I found this remedy no one else has found, and I've used this new system that's very clever, and I've analyzed it in a beautiful way, and I've come up, and you should take this. I don't do that. I said, listen, can you just take that remedy and hold it and just feel how it feels? Does that resonate with you? And if it doesn't, if the patient tells me that it doesn't resonate with me, for all my cleverness and for all my pumped up sense of myself, if it doesn't resonate with my patients, I won't prescribe it. Now, COVID shut down my practice and I'm working only online at the moment. So I do this virtually. And it amazes me that in the last week, I had 2 patients in California, 9,000 kilometers away, who I did precisely that. One of them was a homeopath. And he said, I have never had a remedy that felt so me as what just happened. And, we're dealing with energy medicine. Like, I'm learning of this. If I heard myself saying this 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be saying, what are you on?
Well, I have a fun story to share with you as well, is that I've just been part of a homeopathic proving that was done online. And the previous night, I actually got on the Zoom call a day too early. I got my dates mixed up, but I had the remedies, and I actually was in my daughter's room. I had the remedies and I put it down in this place so that I could remember to take it. Hopped online, realized it was the wrong day. So the next night I went to go and connect, but I was in a different place. And I think this is part of the proving, but I, for the life of me, could not remember where the remedy was. And in my head, I knew I had put it on the cabinet in my room, and I was convinced it should be there. So I looked all around. I thought maybe it'd fallen off, and I couldn't find the remedy. I was so frustrated. And so I went on the Zoom call with the other provers, and I said, I cannot find this remedy, but I know for a fact that it was here. And they're like, that's okay. We're just going to give it to you virtually. And they literally took the pill and just went like this, like reached out over the camera screen all the way. She was in the UK. It's like, here's the remedy, just take it. And I just opened my mouth sitting here down under in Perth and just like virtually took this remedy. And then we did a meditation, and I still had some sensations and things come up. So if you told me this even like a week ago, I would have gone, what ifs? But it is energy medicine at the end of the day, and we need to expand our concept of what that means, because really it's limitless.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe we're a little bit terrified of realizing it's limitless, because we have no excuses then. There's infinite possibilities, and we can create so much magic because of it.
Absolutely. And this is the spirit of Hanuman. And he uses arcane terms like vital force and stuff like that, Like, what does that actually mean? This is what it means. I didn't have a pill to drop it into somebody's mouth. I actually literally invoked the energy. And in this case, it was a remedy called Staphysagria. I just literally invoked that energy, the remedy that, my patient in California, I called it in. It was a remedy that I'm absolutely fascinated with these days. It's a remedy made from tobacco, a particular kind of tobacco from the Amazonian jungle, Nicotiana rustica. I invoked that. I'm using this remedy a lot, and then I invoked this energy of the remedy. I didn't go to the cabinet. I didn't take out things. I literally just called it in. I just, when I was down in the Amazon the first time, then I was went to my teacher. I actually went down to learn to work with tobacco as a medicine. And the teacher said, what do you do? You know, my Spanish was rubbish. He'd no English. And we just really struggled to describe what I was doing. And at a certain moment, he just went, Las Spiritas. You work with the spirits of the plants. I called in the spirit of tobacco, you know,
Yes.
for the patient. I called it in and said, called in the energy of it, the spirit of it, the vital force of whatever name you use. You know, different modalities have different names for the same things. You know, I called in the spirit of tobacco and that. And my patient in California just went, thank you. He had been a homeopath for 40 years. He said, this is the first remedy that I've had that has been my simillimum. Yeah. And he's been working with it for the last 6 months, you know, and it's just, it's been such a pleasure to actually realize that we can do that just energetically.
Mm.
So do we need to give pills and potions?
Exactly. I've asked that. I've asked that too. I had our
Sometimes we do.
clients are our biggest teachers. And I had a client give me that gift about 4 years ago where we were online. And I said to her, Nat Mur, and she just went, oh, and she's like, I could feel it. And I was like, whoa, you're crazy, lady. I had to say that, but that impression stayed with me that whole time and gave me the biggest lesson ever that this is energy medicine. And I'm so grateful to her for that.
And what does that mean in practice? This is what it means in practice.
Mm.
You know, we're very limited. When we constantly look back to our early, you know, homeopaths, we can see this wonderful inspiration there. But you know, our understandings of energy, we don't have this in homeopathy, not in the classical writings. Like Hahnemann can talk about the vital force, but he says right in the first aphorism that our job is to heal. And then in the footnote, not to speculate about why. I want to know why. I want to know, yeah, how I can work with this. And when it's such a beautiful piece of synchronicity for me that my first teachers were tantrics who taught me about practice of, you know, working with chakras, working with energy, helping to balance energy. And I read the first Materia Medica say, oh, this remedy has an affinity for the throat and for the heart. Oh, that's the throat chakra and the heart chakra. Oh, right. So it's all about chakras. But, you know, a lot of my teachers in the early days, when I spoke of that, they said, oh, no. That's esoteric stuff. That's not homeopathy. Homeopathy is a medical science. So, and, you know, for me, homeopathy has much more in common with ritual magic than it has with medical science. And with all respect to all our researchers, to try to fit homeopathy into a scientific model that doesn't acknowledge what the energetics of what we're talking about here. You know, science as we know it talks about biochemistry, it talks about physical things, it talks about molecules. We're giving a remedy that has nothing in it, but it changes people's lives.
Yeah.
You know, that's what fascinates me. So what are the implications of that? And that's the journey I'm on, to really to push the boundaries of it. And COVID and lockdown and going online has been a tremendous inspiration. Well, okay, these are the limitations now. So what are the limits of working with energy? And as you said, I'm still finding there are no limits to this. And I'm excited. Like there's not a day goes by and I realize, oh my God, we've done this. And we've done this virtually. Like, it's just brilliant. Yeah, it's such a, you know, and I'm using, and when I go, you know, into the college to teach, and you know, and I said, guys, we do this kind of work, we support people doing this, and you know, we get such gifts from the work that we do. We get paid for this, you know. It just amazes me that we have the blessing to be able to do such incredible work and make this a living. And it's given me a really wonderful living.
I really want to ask you about, it's just going back, and I'm also in turmoil because I really want to get into the psychedelic type remedies and your work with cosmic care, if you're up for talking about, you know, those types of states, non-ordinary states of consciousness. But just a quick little question that ties in with the delusions that you were talking about before. I've had several little clients over the past decade who have imaginary friends. Now, I think imaginary friends are beautiful. I wish I had one. And often when these little clients come into me, and this comes up that they had this imaginary friend. One of them had this little goat called Malcolm, and Malcolm went everywhere in the car and everywhere, and he had to have a seatbelt and, like had to have food at the table. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And I did say to the mum, look, when I give this remedy to your child, there is a chance that Malcolm might go away. And I kind of explained it this way, that if Malcolm is there as a compensation because there's something in the child's life that's missing and Malcolm's filling that gap, once they have this remedy, Malcolm might not be there because the gap that Malcolm was filling is not needed anymore. I guess it's kind of like a child that has a security blankie or a dummy or something like that. But if this is actually just part of their beautiful imagination, Malcolm's not going to go anywhere. And that has happened. Like sometimes I give a remedy and very soon the imaginary friend will go away. And I'll never forget one of my very first little patients. So this would have been like 2012, because I don't think I'd even graduated yet. She had this long, long blonde hair. She was almost hiding behind her hair. Her hair was down to her bum. She was 12 years old. And she was seeing spirits that were really terrifying her. But in the start, she started telling her mum about it, but then she stopped telling her mum because she could see that her mum was getting terrified about this. So she just kept it to herself. I think I gave her a calcarb or something. She was quite a largish, quite set, and a few other things as well. And then about 6 weeks later, I saw her and I did not recognize her. She chopped her hair to below her ears, and her whole look on her face was different. And these spirits were not bothering her anymore. And that really showed me the power of homeopathy. But what are your thoughts on, I get a little bit sad when the imaginary friends go away because, you kind of want them to stay there. But do you agree that maybe it's filling that is that a delusion? Was that just filling a gap? Should we have given the remedy? Have we done something wrong by making the imaginary friend go away? What do you think is happening there?
Does any of that matter? Does any of that matter?
No, probably not. As long as the client's happy.
I tend to think, honestly, it's an honest answer to your question. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going on there. What's the impact of this so-called imaginary friend? Imaginary, this is not imaginary. This the young 12-year-old I referred to earlier, he was singing his gran. No one else saw the gran appear there. No one else saw the angel. So yeah, it's imaginations, it's delusions, is it? For him, this was something very precious, and if that happens, we're not making it go away. We're not. I would hope that we're not prescribing to make these things go away. If the person is benefiting from it, I'm happy with that experience. I don't need to know, is this his imagination? Is this some delusion? If I know that this person is getting solace or support or is feeling good from the experience, I'm happy for that. I'm happy for there. And often parents try to make it go away. And I hear a lot. I don't work so much with kids these days. I work much more with adult men. But, in the days when I was seeing a lot of kids, like a lot of kids would say to me, and you were right, like, kids, by the time they reached, usually around 6, 7, by the time they reached the change of teeth, like somebody who really inspired me is a guy called Rudolf Steiner, back in the day. And he talks about, that the first 7 years is a landing into the body. So in the first 7 years, the child is more connected with the magical realms, with where they've come from. Like my grandson talking about being with my son in the shining place, like they're connected with those realms. And often, by the time they come to 7, they start becoming aware of their bodies, aware of their mortalities. And you'll often hear kids getting anxious then, Mommy, are you going to die? Am I going to die? They become aware of mortality. They've come into their body. Now, parents can often force that, oh, you're just imagining things. Oh, don't be silly. Or they go to school and they're told, oh, my friend is here. Oh, it's my invisible friend. Oh, it's to be silly, don't be stupid. And kids will often have spoken to me about the kind of challenge they have, because it's their experience and they're being told it's not right. And very often these kids suppress those experiences that are really enhance their lives and are part of the natural coming into their body, staying aware of these things. It's a natural part of their, so it's not about imaginary, this is that person's experience. And for me, it's really important to respect the experience of it, and not to suppress it by talking about it as, oh, that's just an imagination, and that's having, or it's a delusion, we have to get rid of it. Things change after remedies, and for me, remedies are about coming back into balance. If that imaginary friend goes, for me, my understanding of that is that they've come to a place where they don't need that connection anymore. And that's grand. The remedy, there's an intelligence in the information that comes with the remedy, that it brings the person back into balance. And in some cases, it strengthens the connection with the imaginary friend, and that's wonderful. But this is a conversation that also needs to be had with the parents, because as parents, if we don't have these experiences, as homeopaths, if we haven't had these experiences, we often make them wrong. We often make them imaginary or delusionary. And that's called prejudice. That's what Hahnemann is inviting us to not be prejudiced, bringing our prejudice about we think is delusions or imaginary. That's not, it doesn't matter what we think or feel about it. It's important. What is the patient's own experience of it? And so, it's a long answer to a short question.
I love it. Like I said, my list of things to ask you is so long. Please, you're going to have to come back for round 2 at some stage. But something that I am really interested in, and this is the great part about having your own podcast, is you can ask all the questions that you personally want to know about as well.
I hear a power trip coming on here.
It is. It's used in clinical practice, so it's for the greater good, right? But remedies like ayahuasca, with Colin Griffith's work, I've recently started using that in clinic, and the results that I've had has been like nothing short of mind blowing. I think I've only prescribed anhelonium once. I haven't prescribed iboga yet. Ibogaine. Which I think that's a remedy that you proved, right? And you were talking about Australia, doing well with the psilocybin and the MDMA as of 1st of July this year. But in New Zealand, you can get iboga, which apparently, are getting opioid users for, they've been using opioids for decades, off that drug within like a day, like one single experience, and then they're offered for life. So, once we get that in Australia, then I'll be celebrating, because the opioid epidemic that we have worldwide is really, really shocking. But that fascinates me. And you've been to the Amazon a few times. So have you physically used any of these plants, like in the crude form or mostly in homeopathic potency? Talk to us about cosmic care as well, because I was reading your article on your website about how you've used these remedies in aconite 50 and stramonium, all these really high potency remedies to get people that are in serious psychotic drug-induced states out of those within minutes using homeopathy. So that part I really find fascinating. Can you just talk to us about these types of new remedies that we're using? Well, I don't know actually how new ayahuasca is as a homeopathic remedy. Has it been do you know when that was proven, or when did you prove iboga? Ibogaine.
So one of my mentors was a guy called Martin Miles. He was Colin Griffith's teacher.
Okay.
And Martin, so Colin with myself, we were in the same school. Martin Miles was an incredible inspiration. He just lived the soul journey himself, and he was a really important teacher for me. And I sat in his practice while I was at college and watched him, and people would come in the most dreadful states and would come in broken and would walk out straight and shining. His presence was such a magical thing for people. He radiated love and healing for people, and was such an important person for me in the early days. And he introduced me in the early 90s. He said, look, I have a remedy that we're starting to prove. they started the process of meditation proving. So this was a group that's still functioning. Himself and a lady called Janice McAuliffe, they set up something called the Guild of Homeopathy, and the Guild did some wonderful provings, and Colin's books on the materia medica of the new remedies have all come out of those provings. So lots of good stuff. So Martin mentioned that they were just currently proving this new remedy from the Amazon, and he gave me some information about it. So I started to explore it and to use it in my practice in the early 90s. And yeah, was really interesting for me to find something to work with. Like, I was getting results from working with ayahuasca that I'd never come across before. His focus and the focus of the group was like, oh, we don't give drugs to people, and they were really disapproving of people who took drugs. And I used to tease Martin because he liked his glass of wine and he liked a nice cigar. And I said, drugs come in different forms, Martin. Anything that alters your state. And you like your tea? Yes, caffeine. That's another drug.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with it and a lot of teasing. But I used it as a remedy for a few years, and then I went to Holland. And at the time, ayahuasca was legal, and one of my students, I was teaching postgraduate training and sharing the work that I'd done with ayahuasca as a remedy. And this woman was looking very quizzically at me, and she came up during one of the breaks and said, listen, have you had any experience with this? And I said, no, I don't do drugs. I had my early life. My first really deep spiritual experience in my teens were facilitated by cannabis and by psilocybin mushrooms. And I had some extraordinary experiences back then. But when I got involved with the tantric practice, it was a very ascetic practice that I had, and wasn't even caffeine in it, let alone not using any other substances. So for a long period of my life, I lived very pure. My partner, she describes this, that was your po-face time in your life. It was all about the purity and everything else. And this woman said, have you drunk this medicine? I said, no, I haven't done drugs in God, decades. I said, I'd like to invite you to do a ceremony. And I said, oh, really? Okay. And so I was invited to this ceremony. It happened to be 2 days later. And it was a ceremony where it was a church, a Brazilian church called the Santo Daime. And it was very, very formal, men separate from women. The light was on, and hymns were sung and prayers were said. And then everyone queued up to get a glass of this medicine. And it tasted bitter, and it was like, okay. And then I sat down. About a half an hour later, it was like my whole being just exploded inside. And I started to have experiences like I felt like I was about an hour into it. I just felt like, this is everything that I've ever dreamt about is here present at the moment. Every meditation I've ever done has brought me to this place. And I spent the next 5 hours, tears pouring down and bowing. Thank you. Actually been lit physically, mentally, every bit of me in the presence of the divine. I was filled with light, filled with everything that was holy. And I just felt if I died at this moment, I would die complete. And that was 28 years ago, and that was the medicine that brought me back from my son's death. I would not be alive without ayahuasca.
As the remedy, as in the crude substance?
As a remedy. And, for me, something is homeopathic, remedy, if the remedy, whether it comes in a glass or when it comes in potencies, is actually irrelevant for me. That's just a question of dosage. We say, oh, that's the crude substance and this is the remedy. I'm sorry, but that's bull. It's all the remedy. We need to get the right dose. Sometimes we need physical doses. Sometimes we need it. There were times I took the remedy and I took it in homeopathic doses and it made no effect. I had been drinking in a ceremony, with folks who were doing it. And this was a time when it was all legal and working with it, and for the couple of years after my son's death, I was so numbed. I was so out of it. One of my psychiatrist friends said to me, if you presented to any of my colleagues, they would have you locked up. You're experiencing madness. You're experiencing all the symptoms of full-blown psychosis, what I was experiencing. And I was so numbed to that. I was absolutely numb. I would go to the ceremonies, I would drink the medicine, and I would spend hours bawling my eyes out. And really, and each time I took it, it brought me back to myself. After a year or two with drinking it, I was able to work with it in potency. The potencies didn't touch me in the early days, but they came afterwards. So it's all about dosage. When we get into, or have a kind of a snobbery, this is the material dose. If we work with the principles of similars, the resonance, sometimes we need a physical dose of something, and that's true of everything. Sometimes we need to work with the plant, directly with it, and sometimes we need to work with a high potency. That's the beauty of what we have to work with. We have the whole spectrum of it that we can work with, from tinctures all the way to the highest of high potencies, but prescribing them on the basis of the similar state. I was in such a state that I actually needed the physical thing. Now, I'd had a practice of working with this medicine for a long time when my son was killed. So instinctively, I went to that for healing. And I can honestly say to you, other than the love of my daughter that helped me to stay here, I would not be alive without that medicine. And I'm thinking particularly about the drinking it in ceremonies. This is not a casual thing. This is not a recreational substance. This is something that belongs to a ceremony. So what I've learned, and spending a lot of time in the Amazon, a lot of time with indigenous folks in different places, different parts of the world, these are not casual experiences. These are things that you prepare for. These are things that you spend a lot of time preparing for, getting yourself into the right state, working with them in a proper environment, held in a ceremonial space by elders who know how to hold it, and really importantly, supported in the integration of the experience. You can have a big experience and it's, oh my God, my life's changed. Amazing. I see everything differently. Then you go back home and your life is still the same. Your partner is still giving out to you because you've left your dirty clothes around, and it's like, oh, what happened to this spiritual experience? You have to integrate the experience. That's the indigenous work. You don't just have a big experience. You prepare for it, you have it in a safe way, and it's integrated properly afterwards. And I really hope that that kind of indigenous mindset comes into the new use. Psychedelics, according to Time magazine's front page last year, the future of psychiatry, psychedelics. And there's an awful lot of hype around these substances here. We've gone through a period of when understanding of these substances really came in the 40s and 50s. Huge amount of research on things like LSD and mescaline and psilocybin and these substances. They've been around. We've been working with many of these substances, since homeopathy began. Cannabis, agaricus, these have been around for a long time in homeopathy. We've been working with these things. But when I teach these things, we have to also realize they've been around in many cases, for millennia. Anhelonium, I've worked with people in the Mexican traditions with anhelonium, the peyote cactus. There are records and artifacts going back 7,000 years of this practice. And when people talk about, well, I only use the potency, you're disregarding and disrespecting an enormous amount of millennia of healing that's been going on using this in a sacred way. We have to bring back the understanding that we're working with the spirits of the plants, not just the spirits of ayahuasca or anhelonium or these things. That's the realm that we work with. We're working with soul medicine, spirit medicine. These plants are different though, and they are, in the indigenous traditions, they're often called the master plants. Like down in the Amazon, all medicine is plant medicine, but some of these plants are considered to be of a much higher level, that if you really want to do the deepest work, you go to them. And they're plants like Wachuma, San Pedro, cactus, and they're plants like ayahuasca, and plants like mapacho, the Nicotiana rustica. These are really considered to be the master plants, and they're used for really the deepest work. And I think it really, as homeopaths, we really need to bow and honor the traditions that these things have come from. When we can get into our snobby mode and say, oh, that's the material dose, that's a toxic effect. Those effects are part of the healing. These things are used, and really importantly used, for their ability to alter consciousness. And it really, for me, it's been incredibly helpful to understand there are times for working with these things in potencies and time to work with them in the material doses. And if we're going to work with them in the material doses, either in our own, then there are consequences of that. And we need to be very clear about it. The consequences in my country for doctors to give the medicines that you just mentioned that have become legal in your country, they would be arrested. Australia is the only place in the world where that can legally happen. Now, all of these things were legal at one time. We've had a crazy 100 years of a really politically motivated so-called war against drugs. And it's a war against consciousness, a war against people altering their consciousness. There's no problem with people deadening their consciousness with lots of amounts of alcohol, but expanding their consciousness, we can't have that. Like, that's life-changing. And the indigenous have always known that. But we have a culture that has actually vilified these things and made them into Schedule 1 drugs, made them into drugs of no medical use. And we're starting to realize, actually, they do have healing uses. The concern that I have is that they become medical drugs. Like, there's research going on here in Ireland, a number of different researches going on with different psychedelics in a medical context. And the doctors haven't a clue that these things can change people's lives. In my practice as a homeopath, I very often have to treat people, and you mentioned the festivals and working with people in those situations. People have an experience that can be absolutely, literally mind-blowing, and in a good way or in a bad way. And to understand that these are not just a cure for depression or a cure for PTSD. These are life-changing experiences. And we need to draw on the indigenous in this respect, the respect for preparing people for it. That you can potentially take this substance and it can have major impacts in all aspects of your life. So when you come out down from that experience, your life is going to look differently. So what support is there? What understanding is of that? If we make these things medical drugs only, it's great that they're coming out of the box now, and people are starting to be able to use this and recognize these things are not just dangerous drugs to be avoided at any cost, but that they have potential healing effects. But these are master plants that we're talking about, and these are substances that have tremendous power for healing. But we need to respect them and bring the understanding of having the proper mindset in their use, the proper understanding, the proper setting in the way they're used, and the proper way of understanding the integration afterwards. This is really, really important. And I'm hoping and praying, and time will tell what actually happens. It's a very new story coming out of Australia, but it made my day when I read that.
Mine too. I couldn't believe it.
It's wonderful. It's a good step forward. But we need to avoid the hype. Like there's a best-selling Netflix thing about change your mind. That's a 4-parter on Netflix about these things are amazing. One dose of psilocybin and it's 10 years of therapy, and that's hype. And that makes me really concerned. And I do have patients who have had a psilocybin experience, sometimes from the research, sometimes they've done it with an underground therapist, sometimes they've actually done it in places where they're legal, and their life hasn't changed. And they're shocked and disappointed and saying, and in some cases, people who've had depression have gone into suicidal states as a result of not having the magic bullet. And that's the hype. We need to remove the hype from it. As I said earlier, like homeopathy, these things can change your life if you're willing to change your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're tools. They're tools. They're catalysts, just like remedies are tools and catalysts for change. But the real change comes when we consciously make changes in our lives, and we have to see them in the context and hopefully remove the hype from it. But it's great that we're having these kind of conversations, and it's great that we can deal with them. And I feel blessed. You asked earlier about having direct experience of these things. I've traveled a lot. I've spent lots of times. I spent time in Mexico. I've spent time in lots of different countries where these things are part of the tradition. So yes, I've been blessed to be able to sit in ceremony and have experiences of these things. And it was as a result of an experience with the Boga that I went to prove it. And as it was as a result of a healing ceremony at a time back in the 80s when MDMA was legal. It was something that was used. We know MDMA these days as something that people take at raves and at festivals, but for a long time it was only used in a therapeutic environment before it was made illegal. It was made in this part of the world and in the States it was made illegal in 1986. And it became a massive substance that everyone started to use after it was made illegal. Before it was made illegal, it was just used therapeutically and used in a very careful way. And I had experience of that back then that actually changed my life in a really positive way. And I did the proving of it as a remedy. And that has been a really useful thing in my practice. So, yeah, I know about the potential healing of these substances, taking them in material doses. Absolutely, they have been priceless gifts in my life. And I really honor the traditions that these things have come from, and it's been a real blessing to be able to, that we can work with a plant that belongs to the Amazon or the Congo Basin in West Africa, and we can take it as a remedy that we buy from the local remedy homeopathic pharmacies. Like, they're wonderful. You don't have to go along and drink a substance that can, in Peru, they refer to ayahuasca as la purga, the purge, So, it's, we look at homeopaths, we look for the rapid and gentle approach. Drinking ayahuasca is not always gentle. Yeah. I saw the first time I came across Iboga was from an Italian anthropologist, and he showed a film of his initiation by the Bwiti tribe in Gabon in West Africa. He lost 18 kilos through the ceremony.
Wow.
The ceremony went on for 36 hours. He was under the influence of Iboga for over 30 hours. And he puked for a good 18 of those hours.
Yeah, that's not safe.
This is hard
safe
work.
at all.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
And in South America, when you sit in an ayahuasca ceremony, the healers will always invite you to have a good work. I'm not having a trip and I'm going into fancy world. I'm going to work. So this is the indigenous approach. It's not the casual, I'll drop a couple of tabs of acid, I'll take a couple of pills of ecstasy. It's a sacred medicine that you take to work. This is very different. This is not casual, so-called recreational drug use. This is deeply respectful of these substances and the traditions they came from. And when so-called synthetic substances like LSD or even MDMA came out originally, they were brought in with the same respect. They were offered to when Albert Hofmann, when he discovered the healing power of LSD in 1943, he very carefully gave it to people with deep respect for the experiences and for the potential in it to really bring people in touch with their spirit, you know. And for the first 20 years of its work, it was exclusively in the world of psychiatry and addiction and healing. You know, thousands of papers were written about it. It came out of the lab and ended up on the streets. And after 1966, it was made illegal, you know, but so many people have benefited from this when it was used in a careful way, in a less conscious way, and often with a feed of alcohol. And, you know, people have very difficult experiences and blame the substance. It's the way we use these things. We've lost the sacred relationship with these things, the spirit of MDMA, the spirit of psilocybin, you know. And I really hope that your doctors down there have some sense of that this is not just a chemical they're giving to fix depression and to fix PTSD, you know. And yeah, it's a big topic. And you asked about cosmic care, and it's been, I love music, I love festivals, I love dancing, and I love to see people exploring non-ordinary states. And it's been part of my fun and my well-being is to be going to these places. And part of the concern I've always had from my teens that people often get into very difficult states. And I found myself over the years involving myself, supporting friends, supporting people who had difficult experiences. You mentioned Cosmic Care. It's an organization, an NGO that's based in Portugal. Portugal took a very brave step back in the year 2000. They decriminalized the personal use of all drugs, cocaine, heroin, cannabis, everything. So as long as it's for personal use, all of their focus shifted away from the police to the health system. And it was a realization that the vast majority of people who were indulging with substances didn't have a problematic relationship with it. But that huge amount of the problems that people would have was due to the illegality of these substances. So they put into place resources that they took from the police and gave it to the health service, to the support. And that was something that I was really excited about back 20 odd years ago. And I was very drawn. There was a festival in Portugal that was set up around the same time, Boom Festival. It's absolutely intense festival for 7 days. It's a dance festival, so 20 hours a day. There's 135 beats a minute hanging away. And it's trance music. So people just listening to that, you're already brought into an altered state of consciousness. But now, currently, there are 50,000 people at this festival, and probably 49,000 of them are actually in a non-ordinary state, you know, as a result of different substances. You know, that can be an amazing experience, and it can be terrifying. You're in an environment, the main dance floor has 30,000 people dancing together to the same rhythm. It's a rave that goes on for 7 days. And yeah, people are having ecstatic experiences. Some people are having hellish experiences. And the organizers of the festival set up this, what's now become an NGO. We're 20 years going now, and called Cosmic Care. You know, real hippie stuff, cosmic with a K. And to support people having a difficult experience, to create a safe space for people having it. It's not condoning people taking substances, and it works. It's a concept that we refer to as harm reduction. If you want to avoid harm from taking substances, you don't put anything into your body. If you want to put something into your body, there are ways, safer ways of doing it. And the basic principles are the principles that indigenous folks for millennia would recognize. Proper mindset, proper intention, proper environment, proper setting, you know, and proper places to recover from the experience and integrate it. You know, so that's the organization we've set up, and it's become an NGO. And it has spawned It's extraordinary. We have people who come from about 170 different countries arrive at this festival. Last year at the festival, we had in our team 95 people, psychiatrists, psychologists,
Wow.
homeopaths,
So
and
the so
lots of
you're
other
still
therapists.
there. You still go to the festival. Like there's still
Yeah,
homeopaths there treating. Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I have a psychedelic first aid kit that I bring to the festivals. And I'm typically brought in as an elder, thankfully, these days, the idea of sitting with somebody who's having a horrendous psychedelic trip for 8, 10 hours. I'm nearly 68 years old. So, and I thought, yeah, okay, you don't mind being up all night, you could be there. But when a person, like often somebody in those kind of challenging states, the most homeopathic thing they can get is actually a calm, loving presence.
Mm.
That is often what people most often need. But people can get stuck in their states. They can get stuck in thought loops. They can be stuck in trauma. They could be stuck in an experience that's difficult. Often people taking psychedelics, often unconscious material, can come to the surface. Last year, I had three of the people we call the people who come to us at the festival, we call them guests. We don't call them patients or clients. We're guests. And we're sitters, we're not therapists. So the sitters and the guests,
Okay.
it shifts it out of a
Yeah.
medical model. And this is called Psy care, PSY care. This is a particular modality that's really has developed over the time. It's really come on a long way, and you've got some wonderful organizations in Australia doing this work as well. And yeah, it's been going on as long as there've been psychedelics. And 4 years ago, just before COVID, two doctors came in to see what we were doing and in Portugal, and they must have been well into their 70s at the time, and they were congratulating us on how well we were doing. And I said, yeah, that reminds me, when we were doing Woodstock, and they were doing the same work at Woodstock in
Oh, cool.
1969. So it's psych care, it's a new term, but the work has been going
Yeah.
on. So as long as people have been doing psychedelics,
Mm.
people have been doing psych care, doing this kind of support informally, but now it's become a formal thing. So Cosmic Care has trained people to go down to Australia, has trained people to go to Burning Man, has trained as a result of the work we've done in there. It's set up. We have a daughter organization in England called PsyCare UK, and as of last year, and we have PsyCare Ireland.
Okay.
So my big passion at the moment is actually not so much Cosmic Care anymore, is PsyCare Ireland, and with this summer we'll be at 8 festivals, and hopefully next year we'll be at probably 12 to 14 festivals. And we've already saved people's lives.
Amazing. And any of our
We're not just
listeners,
helping them. Excuse me?
oh no, I was just
Sorry,
going to
do you have
say for
something?
our listeners, you've got a great article on your website about cosmic care as well, and some of the very interesting
Yeah.
guests that have turned up in your rainbow colored tent and the remedies that you've administered. Is there any final message that you want to leave our listeners with? And can you tell them how to get hold of you? And you have to promise me that we can do part 2 at some stage. Yeah.
Look, the greatest challenge you can experience is the potential for the greatest healing. It's the essence of homeopathy. So no matter what you're going through, if you can really allow yourself to be with it, to really connect with it as an invitation for healing, you can change your life in a really good way. Homeopathy is an incredible tool for it. Not just the pills and the potions, your willingness to be with your suffering. This is the essence of homeopathy. Allowing yourself to be with it. This changes things. It takes courage. It takes you listening to your body, getting out of your head, leaving the old stories behind. Have the courage to meet whatever challenge it is. And you have the potential in that to change your life, to take your life to a whole other level. I call what I do soul medicine, and my website is declanhammond.com. There's lots of bits and pieces on the website. It's not as fancy and as shining as I'd like it to be. It was put up 7 years ago, so it's a bit clunky as websites go, but there's a lot of good information on it. There's a few podcasts that I've done, and there's a bunch of articles that I've written. I write regularly for Spectrum and Homeopathy that comes out of Germany, and I have a wonderful article coming up now in the next Spectrum magazine about working with men. And it's a topic we haven't touched on, but something I'm absolutely passionate about. Part two, Eugenia.
Wonderful. I'm already excited. Thank you so much for your time today, Declan. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Right. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And time has flown by, and
It's so quick.
it's been great talking to you. Yeah, good.